I'm going to be describing an experiment that occurred on June the 2nd, 2022. This situation is slightly unusual in that I was suffering from symptoms of COVID, a return of my COVID, and I had a little bit of a coughing problem. I took some cough medicine and it gave me kind of a funny sensation. And also I had just come back from a hike, a 4-day hike on the Appalachian Trail. So the weather was relatively warm, varying between 82 and 85 degrees. So the heating system of the house would not be activated, but the air conditioner could have been activated. The skeptical argument would be that we shouldn't expect a lot of pinwheel activity because we hadn't had that much in the past, and the believers would argue that it should be more than average. So let's look what that average might be. Here we have a relatively low number of activations each day before the session. It averaged 2.33 times per day, very, very low. The day of our meeting, there'd just been one activation early in the morning, and the time of our meeting, 7 to 10 time period, there had not been a single activation all week. So we should have low expectation of a lot of activity, assuming that there's a correlation between the previous week and the day of the meeting. And in other studies, we found that correlation is not really very high, at 0.3 or something like that. So 7:05, I set up the camera, and you can see my image in the mirror. Pinwheels are there's some very, very slight movement of the aluminum pinwheel, and then it stops after the setup occurs. I had to return back into the meditation room and I checked the camera audio system, and the pinwheels remain still. There's a slight movement that we see. Pinwheels remain still, but they were still afterwards. And I did a check of the Zoom system, a Zoom recording, and the pinwheels were still during that session. So the system activated at 7:25, and I was watching it at that time, and it did one of the strongest turns, full turn clockwise. You'll hear me talking to the pinwheel.
Hey, Pinwheel, I'm watching you turn.
Yeah, I say that because in the past sometimes that seems to stop it from turning. So we'll see what happens. So the formal session begins. I expect people to arrive at 7:30, and David arrives, or before David arrives, the pinwheel starts turning. It's unusual, it starts turning clockwise. The bell will announce his arrival. Am I admitting him into the room? And now he's admitted.
Hey, David. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah. So if the pinwheel activation signifies something important that the entities or whatever are wanting us to pay attention, the thing they want us to pay attention is that the interaction between people are greeting each other. And so here I'm having a conversation with David.
But I'm still alive.
Here's Heather arriving.
It was actually quite high. Yeah, how many miles did you get in before you came back? A lot. Probably around 60 or so. Wow. 50 or something. Yeah, it's intense. As dogs for.
Here's Heather. Has arrived, and we're having a conversation.
Did I just write something about my impressions there? And I've really spent some quality time. That's interesting. I really spent some quality time reflecting on impressions.
So it might have been activated by what she was saying. She was talking about her experience in Germany, and then Melanie's arriving, so the pinwheel's activated by her arrival perhaps. And then David, they were talking about remote viewing experiments. David's talking about how the precognition of a future event, sometimes that often may not pertain to the actual target in the remote viewing experiment, but to an actual perception that the viewer had.
Yesterday, so I should remember it, but I think he's here.
Okay.
But yeah, that what David described was really bad. That's very, very strong mental, like a kind of mental magnet for that. I really want to know.
I mean, David said that.
So we're dealing with people. David has a lot of experience with remote viewing and also with psychokinesis, with pinwheels and research in that area. And Heather has a lot of experience also with remote viewing, and has just taken a course at the Ron Institute about precognition. Here's Melanie. She often tells stories about her experiences, and this is a story about being stalked and interacting with the police.
I was still away from where my mother's house was, or my house, because I was living there at that time. And I just heard a few words, there's no words, and police investigation 3.
And later on in the story, she has a visionary experience at her audio hearing her mother's voice telling to check a book that this perpetrator, the guy stalking her, his fingerprints are in the book, and this was important evidence for the police to help this case get resolved.
And right. I mean, one of the things I'm doing in Boulder, and right now in Colorado, I'm here, is I'm interviewing the daughter of one of my single case studies that I'm working on, and if it all comes together, like I'm feeling.
So Heather's not just a paranormal practitioner, a psychic practitioner, but she's also kind of a researcher and has experience working with researchers in Germany. So that puts kind of like double hats. So there's 7 activations during our session. There are no further activations at the end of the session. The next activation was Friday morning, and not a very strong one. Just an eighth of a turn in 9 seconds that shuts off, and there's been very, very few activations afterwards. So we're during a period where a low level of activity. So I was trying to capture the essence of making videos of non-activity of the pinwheel, because it seemed to me like the atmosphere differed than when we set the record. The speed of speech was lower, the degree of animation was lower, and let's just look at this video here, and I'll illustrate that point.
It's a pinwheel study. What is the
okay study? It's just that
My impression was that these people were having normal conversations, but there was a kind of therapeutic quality to some of it, which I expected to cause activations, but it did not really seem the case. So the evidence, I suppose, would support the believer hypothesis, because we had 7 activations and there had been 0 during that time period over the last 6 days. But it seemed to me like the excitement and the speed of speech was lower than in previous weeks. And Melanie told a story. While she was telling it, I thought to myself, that in the past has triggered a lot of activations, but we just got 1 during her story. And there's some therapeutic conversations, but that didn't seem to result in this large number of activations. So it could be an important factor that my health wasn't really all that good. I felt like I needed to cough a lot, but that was what happened, and it's an interesting session. No matter what the results, you can learn from these types of experiments.